The sun was shining brightly as the students of Class E made their way to the school bus that would take them to the testing ground for the deserted island special test. Kiyotaka Ayanakoji, a reserved and seemingly average student, stood amongst the group. He had been placed in Class E due to his lack of motivation and poor grades, but there was more to him than met the eye. As the bus drove towards the island, the students chatted excitedly about the upcoming test. The Deserted Island Special Test was a highly anticipated event that took place every year, and it was known to be a true test of strength, leadership, and survival skills. Each class was granted 300 S points to spend on items listed in the manual, and bonus points could be acquired during the test by fulfilling certain conditions. Upon arrival at the island, each class was tasked with choosing one student to be their leader. Leaders could not be changed without a legitimate reason, and on the last day of the test, each class could declare who they thought was the leader of the other classes. For each leader guessed correctly, that class would receive 50 bonus points, but if the leader was guessed incorrectly, the class would lose 50 points as a penalty. As the students explored the island, they quickly discovered that spots on the island could be occupied under certain conditions. A special key card was required to occupy a spot, and the key card could only be used by the person designated as leader. Each occupation of a spot granted one bonus point to the occupying class, and occupation rights expired every 8 hours. Each renewal granted another bonus point to the class in question. However, using another class's occupied spot without permission would result in a 50-point penalty. The students were warned that they would receive set penalties under certain conditions, such as being unable to continue the test due to poor health or injury, which would result in a 30-point penalty and retirement. Pollution of the environment would result in a 20-point penalty, and each absence at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. daily roll call would result in a 5-point penalty. Violence, theft, or destruction of property against another class would result in immediate failure for the class to whom the offending student belonged and the forfeiture of all that student's private points. As the students began to navigate the challenges of the test, tensions rose, and alliances were formed. Kiyotaka Ayanakoji quietly observed the actions of his classmates, trying to determine who was truly trustworthy and who was simply putting on a show. With the pressure mounting and the stakes high, he knew that every decision he made could mean the difference between success and failure. Will Class E be able to overcome the challenges of the Deserted Island Special Test? Who will emerge as the true leaders, and who will fall victim to the penalties and challenges of the test? Only time will tell as the students fight to survive and come out on top. The students of Class E arrived at the island, feeling excited and nervous about the upcoming test. As they disembarked from the boat, they could see the vast expanse of the island before them, surrounded by clear blue waters. The students gathered around their chosen leader, Kiyotaka Ayanakoji, who had been selected for his leadership skills and analytical mind. He had a calm demeanor that inspired confidence in his classmates. As they started to explore the island, they realized that it was larger than they had imagined. The terrain was rugged and challenging, with dense forests, steep cliffs, and rocky shores. The sun was beating down mercilessly, and many students were already sweating profusely. They began to set up their base camp, pitching tents and assembling equipment. They had to be careful with their supplies, as they only had a limited amount of S points to spend. They needed to strategize carefully if they wanted to make the most of their resources. Kiyotaka and a few other students decided to scout the area to look for useful resources. They discovered a freshwater stream, which they marked on their map, and found a small cave that would serve as a good shelter in case of a sudden storm. As the day went on, tensions began to rise between some of the students. Some were arguing about how to divide their resources, while others were competing for the best spots to set up their camps. Kiyotaka tried to keep everyone calm, reminding them that they were all on the same team and needed to work together to succeed. As night fell, the students gathered around a campfire, exhausted but exhilarated by the challenges of the day. They knew that the real test was just beginning, and they would need to stay focused and united if they wanted to emerge victorious. 2000 hours. The sun began to set, and it was time for the evening roll call. All the classes gathered in their designated areas, waiting for their leaders to show up. Sans was nowhere to be found, but little did the other classes know that he was the leader of Class E. He kept quiet about it, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. Izaoi, on the other hand, was running around the island, exploring and gathering information. He was determined to win this test, no matter what it takes. Meanwhile, Sora and Shiro were having a conversation with Erida and Izaoi, trying to gather as much information as they could about the other classes. As the other classes were talking amongst themselves, Sans finally appeared, calmly walking towards Class E's designated area. He had a confident smile on his face, and his fellow classmates couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. The roll call began, and each class reported their current status. Sans reported that Class E was doing fine, but he didn't reveal any additional information. The other classes reported similar statuses, with some adding a few details here and there. After the roll call ended, the students went back to their designated areas, preparing for the night. The first day of the test was over, but the real challenge was just beginning. The Deserted Island Special Test Day 2. As the morning roll call for Day 2 arrived, the students were up early and ready for the challenges ahead. They gathered together, awaiting further instructions from their respective leaders. Class E's leader, Sans, remained quiet about his leadership role, keeping it a secret from the other classes. Meanwhile, Izaoi started running around the island in anticipation of the day's events. As the day progressed, Class A found themselves in a room with Class E, where Gaster went over the rules once more. It was time for Class E to choose their leader. Kiyotaka Ayanakoji, the quiet and reserved student from Class D, watched from a distance as the other classes made their decisions. He had been keeping an eye on Sans, suspecting that he may be the leader of Class E. Meanwhile, Sora and Shiro were engrossed in a conversation with Erida and Izaoi, discussing their strategies for the test. The other classes were also busy discussing their plans, each determined to come out on top. As the time for the evening roll call approached, tensions began to rise. The students knew that every decision they made would have consequences, and failure was not an option. What challenges lay ahead for the students on the deserted island? Who would emerge victorious in the special test? The answers to these questions would soon be revealed, as the students prepared for another day of challenges and tests. As the discussion continued, Kiyotaka Ayanakoji observed from a distance, silently analyzing the situation. He knew that being the leader of Class E could put a target on his back, but he also knew that he couldn't let someone else take charge without knowing their true intentions. Kiyotaka watched as Arisu Sakayanagi spoke confidently and eloquently, impressing many of the students. However, he also noticed the way she subtly manipulated the conversation, directing it towards her own agenda. Kiyotaka remained silent, knowing that it was too early to make a move. Meanwhile, Kohei Katsuragi's aggressive questioning put both Erida and Izaoi on edge. They knew that revealing their true identity as the leader of Class E could put them in danger, but they also knew that they couldn't lie forever. Kiyotaka watched as the tension in the room grew, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Suddenly, Kiyotaka's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number, simply saying, "I know who you are." Kiyotaka's heart raced as he tried to figure out who could have sent the message. He looked around the room, wondering if anyone was watching him. As the discussion about the Class E leader continued, Kiyotaka struggled to focus. He knew that he had to be careful, but he also knew that he couldn't let the other students control the narrative. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to reveal his true identity. As the discussion about the Class E leader continued, Masayoshi Hashimoto suddenly accused Gaster of rigging the game through class points. "It's obvious that Class E's homeroom teacher had something to do with this," he exclaimed, causing a stir among the students. Gaster remained calm despite the accusation, but Sora and Shiro immediately came to his defense. "That's ridiculous," Sora said. "The circumstances clearly show that the leader was chosen at random. There's no way that Gaster could have rigged the game through class points." Shiro chimed in, "Not to mention, it's against the rules for a teacher to interfere with the students' points. If Gaster had done something like that, he would have been caught and punished already." Kiyotaka nodded in agreement. He knew that Sora and Shiro were right, but he also couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the attention was off him for the time being. He continued to observe the other students, looking for any signs of weakness or deception. As the discussion died down, Arisu Sakayanagi suddenly spoke up. "I have a proposal," she said. "Since Class E is unable to determine their leader, why don't we let Kiyotaka Ayanokoji be our temporary leader for the duration of the test?" Kiyotaka's heart skipped a beat at the mention of his name. He wasn't sure if he was ready for such a responsibility, but he also knew that this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to reveal his true identity. As the tension continued to rise, Kiyotaka decided to step forward and try to defuse the situation. "Excuse me, everyone," he said calmly, "but I have something to say." All eyes turned to him as he took a deep breath and continued. "I know that some of you are suspicious of me, and I understand why. But I want you all to know that I am not the leader of Class E." As he spoke, Kiyotaka could see the doubt in some of the students' eyes, but he pressed on. "I know that some of you are also suspicious of Gaster, but I can assure you that he is not the leader either. And as for Papyrus," he said, turning to the tall skeleton, "he is not the leader either. I have reason to believe that the leader of Class E is someone else entirely." Masumi Kimuro raised an eyebrow. "And who might that be?" Kiyotaka hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I cannot say for certain, but I have my suspicions. All I ask is that we continue to work together as a team and trust each other. We are all here to win this game, and we cannot do that if we are constantly at each other's throats." The room fell silent as the students considered Kiyotaka's words. Finally, Gaster spoke up. "I think Kiyotaka is right. We need to work together if we're going to have any chance of winning. And as for the leader of Class E, we'll figure it out eventually. But for now, let's focus on the game." The other students nodded in agreement, and the tension in the room began to dissipate. Kiyotaka couldn't help but feel relieved as he watched the other students start to work together, even if it was only for the time being. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to do whatever it took to come out on top. As the tension continued to rise, Kiyotaka decided to step forward and try to defuse the situation. "Excuse me, everyone," he said calmly, "but I have something to say." All eyes turned to him as he took a deep breath and continued. "I know that some of you are suspicious of me, and I understand why. But I want you all to know that I am not the leader of Class E." As he spoke, Kiyotaka could see the doubt in some of the students' eyes, but he pressed on. I know that some of you are also suspicious of Gaster, but I can assure you that he is not the leader either. And as for Papyrus, he said, turning to the tall skeleton, he is not the leader either. I have reason to believe that the leader of Class E is someone else entirely. Masumi Kimuro raised an eyebrow. And who might that be? Kiyotaka hesitated for a moment before speaking. I cannot say for certain, but I have my suspicions. All I ask is that we continue to work together as a team and trust each other. We are all here to win this game, and we cannot do that if we are constantly at each other's throats. The room fell silent as the students considered Kiyotaka's words. Finally, Gaster spoke up. I think Kiyotaka is right. We need to work together if we're going to have any chance of winning. And as for the leader of Class E, we'll figure it out eventually. But for now, let's focus on the game. The other students nodded in agreement, and the tension in the room began to dissipate. Kiyotaka couldn't help but feel relieved as he watched the other students start to work together, even if it was only for the time being. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was determined to do whatever it took to come out on top. Masumi Kimuro huffed, clearly not satisfied with Papyrus's response. Well, we need to start somewhere, she said, crossing her arms. Kiyotaka nodded in agreement. Yes, we do. But we need to approach this logically and methodically. We should start by gathering more information. At this, Gaster stepped forward. I agree. Let's take a step back and examine the facts we do have. We know that the leader of Class E was chosen randomly, and we know that they are among us. Sora and Shiro nodded in agreement. And we also know that the game is designed so that the leader's identity is not immediately revealed, Sora said. Kiyotaka nodded. So, we need to figure out how we can gather more information without tipping our hand to the other classes. Izaoi spoke up at this point. What if we use our talents to gather information discreetly, he suggested. For example, I could use my agility to scout the island and see if I notice anything out of the ordinary. Kiyotaka nodded. That's a good idea. We should all use our talents to gather information, and then we can reconvene and share what we've found. The group agreed, and they all split up to begin gathering information. Kiyotaka knew that this was only the beginning, but he was determined to find the true leader of Class E and help his classmates succeed in the game. Masumi was unconvinced and continued to insist on her suspicions about Papyrus. However, Papyrus remained resolute in his claim of innocence, and the discussion eventually moved on to other potential candidates for the Class E leader. As the debate continued, Kiyotaka realized that he had to take action. He stepped forward and revealed his true identity as the leader of Class E. The other students were shocked, but Kiyotaka knew that this was the only way to ensure that Class E's interests were represented in the upcoming game. Sans finally had enough of the guessing game, so he decided to reveal himself as the leader. All right, you got me. I'm the leader, he said, a hint of boredom in his voice. Class A was in disbelief, and some of them even accused Sans of lying and trying to manipulate them. What kind of game are you trying to play? One of them shouted. Papyrus couldn't stand it anymore, and he jumped in to defend his brother. My brother would never lie. Well, okay, maybe, but it's only to protect me, not a bunch of strangers who are mean, he yelled, his voice echoing throughout the room. Class A was taken aback by Papyrus' outburst, and for a moment, there was a tense silence in the room. Papyrus continued to insist that Sans was telling the truth and that there was no need for further discussion. Arisu Sakayanagi tried to speak up, but Papyrus immediately shut her down, telling her to shut up repeatedly. He was determined to leave and end the conversation, stating that they had found out who the culprit was. Kiyotaka Ayanokoji saw an opportunity to assert his authority and threatened Papyrus, saying that if he was wrong, he would use his class points to kick him out of school. Sans looked upset at this, and Aoi couldn't help but smirk, knowing that it would come down to this kind of power play. Shiro and Sora agreed to help Kiyotaka Ayanokoji cover the cost of using class points if he didn't have enough, showing their support for him. Papyrus, however, remained confident in his choice and was ready to leave. The tension in the room was palpable as they all prepared to depart, unsure of what the future held for them. As Class A filed out of the room, Arisu Sakayanagi lingered behind, her eyes fixated on Sans. She had heard rumors of his brother Papyrus, and seeing him in person had only confirmed her suspicions. Turning to him, she spoke up with a question. "That was your brother, right?" Sans replied with a simple "MHM?" "Yeah." Arisa didn't waste any time expressing her concern. "I really recommend getting him transferred to another school. If we were in a real survival situation, someone like that could get everyone killed. It's naive to blindly trust people without considering the facts." Sans' expression was unreadable as he listened, but his silence spoke volumes. Arisu could tell that he was protective of his brother, but she couldn't ignore the potential danger he posed to their class. She watched as Sans turned to leave, intentionally leaving the door open behind him. Arisu couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had gotten under his skin, and she relished in the feeling of power that came with it. As the two were left alone in the room, the tension between them was palpable. Arisu knew that Sans didn't trust her, and she didn't trust him either. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Meanwhile, Sans was lost in thought. He couldn't deny the truth in Arisu's words, but he couldn't turn his back on his own flesh and blood either. He had to find a way to protect both his brother and his classmates. As the days went by, the competition only grew more intense. Arisu and Sans found themselves at odds with each other, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them. They couldn't resist the pull they felt towards each other, despite their differences. Their interactions were fraught with tension, each trying to outdo the other. But underneath it all, there was a mutual respect and understanding that kept them coming back to each other. One day, as they were locked in another argument, Arisu leaned in close to Sans, her eyes flashing with excitement. "I can't help but wonder, Sans. What would happen if we stopped fighting and worked together?" Sans was taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor, but he couldn't deny the thrill that ran through him at the thought of teaming up with her. Together, they could be unstoppable. As they left the room, a new energy coursed through them. The competition was far from over, but with each other by their side, they knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they walked through the halls, they couldn't help but steal glances at each other, their hearts pounding with the excitement of the unknown. The world was their oyster, and they were ready to take it on together. Sans and Papyrus were the two brothers Arisu Sakayanagi had just witnessed in action. They were part of Class E, a group of students in a special school where the goal was to climb a tower and reach the top. The tower was filled with challenges, puzzles, and other obstacles that the students had to overcome in order to progress. Sans was the older brother and a quiet, reserved type. He was smart and capable, but didn't like to draw attention to himself. Papyrus, on the other hand, was outgoing and energetic. He loved making friends and always had a positive attitude. Arisu Sakayanagi, on the other hand, was a girl from a wealthy family who was known for her cold and calculating nature. She was a brilliant strategist and had a reputation for always getting what she wanted. She had her sights set on reaching the top of the tower and was willing to do whatever it takes to get there. As Sans and Papyrus chatted with their classmates, Arisu Sakayanagi watched from a distance, plotting her next move. She knew that if she wanted to succeed, she had to eliminate any obstacles in her path. And right now, Sans and Papyrus were the biggest obstacles standing in her way. As the day wore on, Arisu Sakayanagi made her move. She approached Sans and Papyrus and tried to convince them to join her team. But Sans wasn't interested, and Papyrus was too loyal to his brother to consider it. As Arisu Sakayanagi watched Sans and Papyrus chatting with their classmates, a wicked grin spread across her face. "Very cute, he thinks he has a choice," she thought to herself. "Either they work for me, or I will see them crushed by each other." She continued to observe them, lost in thought. "Their brotherly bond will be their downfall," she mused. "I will make sure of it." With that, she turned and walked away, her mind already working on ways to destroy the bond between the two brothers.